Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery, to the thousands live on Zoom and the millions live on YouTube. It is wonderful to have you here tonight. To the 1,001st person on Zoom. Welcome. All right, so tonight, guys, we are going to be doing Masechet Eruvin, chapters 6 and 7. Hopefully, we are going to get it up on the screen over here, and we'll get it up for you over here as well. Are we feeling ready, guys? All right, everybody see it there?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Now.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, go! So, for chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9, so the next couple of weeks, we are going to be dealing with an Eruv Chatzeirot, Eruv Chatzeirus, and Shitufei Muvaos. Eruv Chatzeirus, which is people from one courtyard coming together, making an Eruv which allows them to transfer from one property to another and from their properties into the courtyard. And a Shitufei Muvaot is in it to enable several courtyards along one alleyway to be able to merge together and have use of the alleyway spaces, etc., etc. So we are dealing with areas which are biblically considered to be a reshut hayachid, a private domain. And biblically, you can actually carry between two reshuyot hayachid. You can actually carry between two public domains biblically. However, the rabbis, midrabanan, we have an extra layer of stringency. And so midrabanan, you have to have an eruv in order to join the domains together if they are separately owned. And that is as a deterrent to prevent people from carrying, God forbid, in a public domain. So the types of things that we're wanting to be able to do is we want, for example, within one courtyard, we want resident A and resident B to be able to move freely between their courtyard. And we want courtyard A and courtyard B to be able to move freely between each other. But what we are not going to be able to do necessarily with an Eruv Chatzeirot is for one person in his courtyard to move freely to the house of the person in another courtyard, if I'm not mistaken. When it comes to a shituv muvalt, when it comes to the partnership for an alleyway, so what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be enabling people to join together to cross alleyways between courtyard to courtyard. What's interesting about a shituf muvaot, a partnership for an alleyway, is that they have to use bread. But we'll see that's not the case with the Eruv Chatzeirus, with the ability for people to move within their own courtyard. What we also see is that if one person didn't participate in the Eruv of the courtyards, then his house and his portion of the courtyard are going to become a problem. So as far as everybody else goes, they're going to be able to carry between each other's houses and into the courtyard. Is that wrong? No, maybe if one guy did not participate in the Eruv, it actually prevents everyone from carrying into the courtyard, because the courtyard is now not under joint ownership. So I think that's more accurate. If one person decides not to participate in an Eruv Chatzeirot, to join one courtyard together, then actually it becomes a situation where the residents of that courtyard now cannot carry into the courtyard because they don't all jointly own it. But there are two ways to rectify this. One of them is that the guy can be mevatel. He can forego his rights and he can forego his ownership of the courtyard, and then that's going to allow people to carry between the house and the courtyard, and it's just him who's going to be excluded. And the second is to sell the rights to his property, so that the residents of the courtyard own his share, own his portion. And in so doing, that allows them free movement. One other interesting thing as well is that if he foregoes his rights, then he actually does get the privilege of carrying to other people's houses. He just can't carry within his own. He can't carry from his house to the courtyard or the courtyard to his house. But as a guest, he could carry from the courtyard to somebody else's house. So this is all very, very interesting. Lots of rules to wrap our heads around. So it's going to be fun. So here we go, guys. Chapter 6, Perek Vav. Now, really, we've been talking all this time about Jewish residents in the courtyard, but what about a non-Jewish resident? So, technically speaking, a non-Jewish resident doesn't actually have to factor in this conversation, as it were, halachic conversation. But midrabanan, we say that a non-Jewish person should give up their rights, which they're not able to do just by explicitly saying that they forego their rights. There has to be some kind of transfer. There has to be some kind of rental so that everybody in the courtyard is nonetheless able to carry. The reason why the rabbis did this is in order to discourage people from living in neighborhoods with non-Jewish people. Because it would be more complicated for them to sort out an Eruv in this way, it would therefore discourage Jewish people from buying properties in areas with non-Jewish people. That was the primary purpose for the rabbis to make it stricter. But let's have a look. Mishnah Aleph. Hadar im hanachri b'chatzer, a person who is living in a courtyard, and there's a non-Jewish family also living in the courtyard, or imi she'eno moda be'eruv, or you're living in the same courtyard as somebody who does not acknowledge the Eruv. So the Mishnah says, Hari ze ose alav divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir's position is that you are forbidden from to be able to carry to and from your house. It is not going to be possible to make an Eruv Chatzeros. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, La'olam ena oseh al shehu shnei Yisraelim oseh zeh. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that you can't have a situation of being restricted from making use of the Eruv unless there are two Jews who are restricting each other. But if you have a situation that is less than that, then there will be ways of sorting out an Eruv to be able to carry from your property to another. Interestingly, by the way, I have a note here that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would not entertain the idea of one Jewish family living in the same courtyard as one non-Jewish family, because there would have been too much risk. It would have been too dangerous, apparently, to be able to do that. So they would have always had tried to live in properties where there was at least one other Jewish resident there. So that is why he has the position the way that he has it. Moving on to Mishnah Base, where Rabban Gamliel is going to bring a story about a Sadducee, which is somebody who did not believe in the oral law. And we are going to be learning as to whether or not he can achieve a void, a nullification of his rights to the courtyard, which we said a Jew can do, which we said a non-Jew can't do. But what about this guy in between? What about the Sadducee, who might be Jewish but is in a completely different place to where a Jewish cop should be? So, Amar Rabban Gamliel said, "Ma'aseh b'Saduki echad." There was a story about a Saduki, Shahaya Darimanu, that he was living with us. B'mavoi b'Yerushalayim, he was living with us in the same alley in Yerushalayim. Ba'amar lanu Abba, and my father said, "Maharuvot sirius kol hakelim lemavoi ad shlo yotzi v'ye'asar aleichem." So his father instructed them to hurry up and get everything that they need to take out, get it all out of there into the alley before he puts his restrictions on you. So the reason for that is once they're in the alleyway before Shabbos, they can be carried even without an Eruv Chatzeros. So there would have been a situation of a shituf mavoi where they'd be able to move around freely in the alleyway. But because this Saduki would void the ability to make an Erev Chatzera, so the instruction was to quickly get everything out so that they could carry. Because when he changes his mind and refuses to go along with the Erev, it's going to be problematic for him to do it. So actually what we see here is that fundamentally he could nullify, but we just can't trust him because we are afraid that he would change his mind. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lashon acher. Rabbi Yehuda interprets this in a slightly different way, and he said that the instruction was like this: Maru v'asu tzarchechem b'mavoi ad shelo yotzi v'yetz aleichem. He said that you should hurry up and you should get your kalim, you should get everything that you need out, ad shelo yotzi, and you should do that before Shabbos starts, because once Shabbos starts, v'yetz aleichem, then it doesn't matter. He is going to be removing the ability for you to have a valid Erev Chatzeros, to be able to merge these the properties in the courtyard together. So that was the two ways of understanding this story with a Sadducee, with a Tzaduki. Mishnah Gimel, Anshe Chatzer sheshachach echad mehem v'lo erev. If you have the residents of the courtyard, but you've got one of them who forgot to join in with the Erev. So what is the story over there? It says the Mishnah Beisar Asur Milahachnis Milahotzi Lo V'Lohem. So his house, it's going to be forbidden for him and for everybody else to take in or take out of his house. But V'Shilahem Mutarim Lo V'Lohem. But when it comes to everybody else's houses, they're going to be allowed to move freely between them. Not only that, but he is going to be able to move as well. In and out of their property. If they give permission to him to be able to if they give permission to him, then the Mishnah says, then he is going to be permitted to carry from his property to the courtyard, but no one else will be able to carry into his house. And the reason for that, as I understand it, is that it's not going to be a situation that all of them can be counted as guests for his one house, but he can be considered as a guest, and therefore there is ways of rectifying it so that he can move a bit more freely. Hayushnaim, if there were two residents who had forgotten to join in with the Erev, says the Mishnah, Osrin Zeh al Zeh. So everybody in the courtyard is going to have a problem until there's a situation where they are both kind of nullifying their rights over the courtyard. Says the Mishnah, She'echad nosin reshus v'notel reshus, because one may give permission, the notel reshus, and also it says here acquire the part of others. But shnayim, when it comes to two residents, be able to do this. Shnayim nosin reshus, two might be able to give away their rights over their spaces. Aval v'ein notelin reshus, but they will not be able to acquire the parts of others. So they will not be able to be given the rights to move around freely if it's two residents. Mishnah Dalet. If you don't join in, when are you supposed to be nullifying and giving away your share? We're giving it away for the purpose of Shabbos. We're not kind of like giving it away forever, but it's in order to allow people to move freely. When are they supposed to give away the share to the courtyard? It says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omrim Mim'od Yah. Beis Shammai say they have to try and make sure it's done before Shabbos comes in. They have to do it while it is still day. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel say Mishech HaShecha. They could even do it after dusk. They could even do it after Shabbos comes in. Misha Nasam Rashuso V'Hotzi. If you have a situation where one person gave away his share, he gave the permission for people to be able to move, but then V'Hotzi, but then he carried out an object. Beib Shogeg, Beib Bezid, says the Mishnah, whether he did it inadvertently or whether he did it on purpose, it is going to be forbidden. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's the position of Rabbi Meir. So continues the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'mezid oser b'shogeg eino oser. Rabbi Yehuda says that if he did this on purpose, then he is going to restrict, and if he did it by accident, inadvertently, then it is not going to restrict. What's at play here is that if he has been mevatel his reshus, so it's going to allow everybody else to move around freely, but it does theoretically restrict him. But now, if he is nullifying his nullification and he is carrying, so then we see this discrepancy as to whether, depending on whether he's done it on purpose or whether he's done it inadvertently. But what he's doing is he could be nullifying his nullification and therefore causing problems for others to be able to move around, because he is now indicating that actually he's not foregoing his rights of the courtyard so that others may carry, but instead he is now creating restrictions for everybody else on account of his actions.
How would one, maybe you've discussed it before, but I haven't been on this.
I wouldn't presuppose anything, Martin.
Unusual to me. I live in a block of flats with an air of, because we're completely surrounded. We have a Shabbos gate because we don't, there's a gate you can open with a combination lock instead of the electronics. But those people who want to use it as an Eruv to go from one to the other, we use it. But there's 21 people living. I haven't asked 21 people, 3 of whom are non-Jews, whether they permit me to consider it an Eruv.
Is your building not within the Eruv of Bushi, though?
No.
Oh, really?
But what about the Eruv of Bushi? I mean, we haven't asked the 250,000 people who live in Bushi whether they will allow us to consider it an Eruv, surely.
So I will say 2 things. Number 1, I'm not an Eruv expert. And number 2, I'm not an Eruv expert. That's the answer to both of your questions. But I don't know how it all works. Is it possible that when the Eruv went to the council for planning and people had the opportunity to protest, maybe that's the basis for being able to...
a lot of people did protest.
Yeah, but it still went through. So, yeah.
I can imagine that a number of people here don't even realise, especially the non-Jewish people, there's 3 out of 71, that we consider, because it's fenced completely right round the entire property, that we consider we can carry goods on the lawn. And
right. So I don't know enough. I don't know enough of the practical applications of the halacha to answer your question. I would consult your local halachic authority. I'm just the assistant local halachic authority. Okay, so Mishnah. Mishnah Hay. Here we go. So we seem to have another bit of background to be able to understand this. If you make a shituv muvat, if you partner to be able to move between the alleyways, and you make that with bread, then you don't need to make an erev chatzerot. You do not need to also find food to be able to make this partnership for the courtyard. And that apparently is because, since bread is such a significant item, it brings attention to what you're trying to accomplish, and therefore somehow by making the shituf mavot, by making the alleyways joint up, or the alleyway joint up, so the courtyards are all joint up, so apparently that will serve the purpose for the courtyards as well. That's by way of background to Mishnah Hay. So the Mishnah says, if you have a homeowner who was partnered in partnership with his neighbors, it seems they are all in a joint wine business. So you've got all the people in this alleyway who are partners in a wine business. Lazeh b'yayin v'lazeh b'yayin. They're joined with this one with wine and that one with wine. Says the Mishnah, Einam tzrichin erev. They do not need to prepare an erev. Now, why is this something unique to say? That's because we just said that if you use bread, then you don't need to make an erev chatzerot. But it appears that the difference is if you are all in the same business and you used wine, then you still don't need to make an erev chatzeros. So we said that bread is the equalizer. Wine is not usually an equalizer. Usually, if you used wine, you would have to make an erev chatzeros as well. But the Mishnah is telling us over here that if they're all in the same business and they're using wine, then they don't need to make a further erev. That's the position at first in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh elad tzrichi le'areg. Rabbi Shimon says, in any case, you would not need to make an erev. I believe what Rabbi Shimon is saying is he's disagreeing with the concept that if you use anything other than bread, that you'd have to make an erev. It seems perhaps what Rabbi Shimon is saying is that whatever you use for the alleyways, if you make a shittuf for the alleyways, if you make an erev for the alleyways, it's going to cover you for the courtyards as well. But it would seem that we don't hold like this, and so the original introduction that I gave would still stand. Mishnah Vav. If there are different people who are renting rooms, for example, in a hotel or somewhere like that, or an inn, so the concept is going to be as follows. If the walls of their rooms are reaching the ceiling, then all of the rooms are going to be considered distinct entities. And therefore, you would require an erev chatzerot because they're all in their own places. And so to be able to move between them, they're going to need to have an erev chatzeros. If the walls do not reach the ceiling, I can't say it's a particularly enjoyable hotel room to take, but nonetheless, if the walls are not reaching the ceiling, then according to Beis Hillel, we'll see, they are considered one entity. And so that's going to have play on what we see now. Says the Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. Chamesh chavuros sheshavsu b'trakli nechad. You've got 5 groups of people who are spending Shabbos along one hallway. Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Erev l'kol chavura v'chavura. So Beis Shammai say that each of them are going to need to make their own Eretz, because they're all distinct spaces. Beis Hillel Omrim, Erev echad l'chulam. But Beis Hillel say they are considered as one entity. I guess this is presupposing that the walls are not reaching the top. So where they're not reaching the top, he would say that they are all one space, and so one erev is going to solve the problem for all of those residents, all of those tenants, all of those guests. Umodim, but Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai would agree. Where if some of them are occupying rooms and some of them are in attics, upper chambers, so if some of these rooms are distinct and some of them are not, then they would both agree that everybody is going to need their own individual Eruvin. All right. For all of this, for further research, do consult your local Gemaras or your local commentaries. It's one of the pitfalls of plowing through Mishnayos, especially with someone who's not an expert in the laws of Eruvin, that you don't really get the full appreciation and understanding of why all of the dinim are as they are. But yeah, you can either do further research or get yourself a better teacher. Here we go with Mishnah Zayin. Says the Mishnah, it doesn't say this, but by way of introduction to the Mishnah, if all of the members of the courtyard eat meals together, what we will see is that they don't need to have an erev. So, for example, if you've got a family who own all of the properties in one courtyard, then that's the kind of scenario that you could paint for yourself over here. So the Mishnah says, "Ha'achin hashutafin shayu oichlin al shulchan avihem v'sheinim bevatehem tzrichin erev l'chol echad ve'echad." Says the Mishnah, if you have got brothers who are partners, and they're all in this same shchuna, this same area, and they are all eating at their father's table, but sleeping in their own homes. So I don't believe that this means that they are literally eating at their table, at the father's table. What it means is that they are supported. The properties are all owned by the father, for example, right? So the Mishnah is that they need to have tzrichin erev lekol echad ve'echad. There needs to be an erev for each and every one of them. Lefichach, therefore, if shachach echad mehem v'lo erev, therefore, if one of them forgets and didn't contribute to the erev, mevatel es reshusa, then he has to annul his right to the share in the courtyard. Eimasai. So what we're saying is as follows: is that they all have to contribute. It doesn't mean that there needs to be lots of different areas. It means they all have to partake in the one area, as opposed to a situation where one person could set the area for everybody in the courtyard. I think that's what it's saying. So if one of them forgets to join in with it, then it's going to impact everybody around, and he has to nullify his rights over the courtyard. Eimasai, when is this? That is when the Eruv is being placed in some other place, i.e. there's another resident in the courtyard who's not related to this family, so they're putting it in their house. But if that's the case, then they all have to join in with it. Avalim haya Eruv by Islam. But if the Eruv was being brought into the family-owned properties, or there was no one else living in the courtyard, then they shouldn't need to prepare an Eruv at all. So they would only need to prepare an Eruv if there were other residents in the courtyard and it wasn't exclusively owned by the father, or where they owned it exclusively, they don't need to have an Eruv. Okay. Mishnah Ches, we're dealing with multiple courtyards which are connected to each other, and they are connected to an alleyway, a shared alleyway. So we're going to see that we can make individual Eruvei Chatzeros, we can make individual courtyard arrangements for the houses, but not between the courtyards themselves. But if there was an opening, if there's an opening between, so I think what my notes are telling me is that if the courtyards are not connected, then making an area of Chatzeris is not going to allow you to carry from one courtyard to the next. But if there are openings between the courtyards, then you could make a joint Erev Chatzeris. I think that's where we're coming from with this. So the Mishnah says, Chamesh Chatzeris Pesuchas Zulazu or Pesuchas Lamavoy. If you've got 5 courtyards which are open one into the next, let's just scroll down so we can see the English. 5 courtyards which are opening into each other, and they are opening into an alleyway. What happens if they have made their courtyard Erevs, but they have not made the partnership for the alleyway? Says the Mishnah, they are going to be permitted to move around in their courtyards, but they are going to be forbidden to move around in the alleyway. Says the Mishnah, if they have combined for the alleyway, then, as we said before, that the making an area for the alleyway will also help for the courtyards. So if you make the alleyway joint, then you're going to be able to move around in the courtyards as well. What if you've got a situation where they've done their courtyard and they've done their alleyway, but the shachach echad mibnei chatzer velo erev, but you have got one individual in one of the courtyards who has forgotten to take part in it? Says the Mishnah, mutarin kam v'cham, they are permitted to use both. It would seem that even he, in that instance, would be allowed to move around. Continues the Mishnah, mibnei mavui v'lo nishtatef. If you've got a situation where one of the residents in the alleyway forgot to participate, mutarim b'chatzeres v'asurim b'mavoi, then he, I guess, is going to ruin it for all of the people wanting to move in and out of the alleyway, but he won't ruin it for people to move in and out of their courtyards. The reason is the Mishnah says an alleyway to the courtyards is like the courtyard to a house, meaning I guess that you can knock one element of it out, but you're not going to be able to knock the totality of it out. So he might be able to ruin the ability to move between the courtyards, but he won't then be able to go one tier further, one level further, and ruin people's abilities to move within the courtyards as well. Says Mishnah 9. You've got two courtyards. Let's just try and picture this for a second. So we come in off the alleyway and we walk into one courtyard, and that courtyard leads into another courtyard. So in the outer courtyard, there'll be at least one resident whose house opens into that first space, and in the inner courtyard, there's going to be at least one resident that opens up into the inner courtyard. But here's the catch: there's only one entrance point. So the person who lives in the inner courtyard has to walk through the outer courtyard to reach his property. We've got one entranceway off the alley into the outer courtyard, and everyone has to walk into that outer courtyard, but only the inner resident would have to walk into the inner courtyard. So you've got two courtyards, one inside the other. Says the Mishnah. Good luck, Rabbi Nick, in trying to understand this. That was word for word, the text from the Mishnah. Here we go. Eva hapnimis velo eva hachitzona. If the resident of the inner courtyard prepared an Eruv, but the residents of the outer courtyard did not, says the Mishnah, hapnimis muteres vachitzona asura. The residents in the inner courtyard are going to be allowed to move around, but the resident in the outer courtyard is not going to be able to move around. Hachitzona velo hapnimis shtein asuras. If the resident of the outer courtyard has made an Eruv, but the residents of the inner courtyard have not made an Eruv, says the Mishnah, shteihin asuras. They are, but the first position of the Mishnah is that they are both going to be forbidden. So the inner resident has the ability to block the outer resident's Eruv, because he has to go through. So he, in a way, has some rights over the outer courtyard. And so if he does not take part in the Eruv, then he is actually going, it seems, to knock the other guy's ability to make himself an Eruv for his outer courtyard. Says the Mishnah, Eruv azula atzmo v'azula atzmo. If they each make their own Eruvin, Zumiteres b'fnei atzmo, then so then they're each going to be able to carry on in their own courtyards. However, we have some disagreements on this. Rabbi Akiva oser hachitzona. Rabbi Akiva is going to forbid the outer one, shedrisas haregel osarta, because the right to walk in the right for the inner person to walk in the outer courtyard, according to Rabbi Akiva, they will all need to club together for the to be able to carry in the outer courtyard. They are all considered as residents of the outer courtyard, and therefore they're all going to have to club together, according to Rabbi Akiva, in order to create a valid Eruv for the outer courtyard. But the Chachamim say that the inner residents are not really considered true residents of the outer, and so the fact that they have to pass through, the fact that they have the right of way, is not going to prohibit it. So I believe what that's saying is then, therefore, according to the Chachamim, that if they each make their own Eruvs, then that's going to be fine according to the Chachamim. Says Mishnah Yud, Shachach echad min hachatzona v'lo erev. What if one of the outer residents has forgotten to take part in the Eruv? Says the Mishnah, Hapnimis muteres v'achitzona asura. The inner is still going to be allowed to carry. The outer is not going to be allowed to carry. Min hapnimis v'lo erev. If one of the inner residents forgot to prepare the Eruv, join in with the Eruv, then, like we saw before, shteihin asuras, then it's going to have a knock-on effect to the outer courtyard, and they won't be allowed to carry. Nasnu Eruvin b'makom echad. If they put the Eruv in one place, V'shachach echad. So if they, I guess, if the inner and the outer club together, but one of the residents forgets, v'shachach echad bein min ha'pnimis bein min ha'chitzona, but either one of the inner residents or one of the outer residents forgets, v'lo erev, and he didn't take part, then, says the Mishnah, shteihin asuros, then they're both going to be forbidden. V'im hayu shel yichidim, einan tzrichen le'arev. But if the courtyards belong to individuals, says the Mishnah, then they do not need to prepare an Eruv. Why is it that if they're owned individually, that they don't need to prepare an Eruv? I think it's because the inner guy has to go through the outer guy's courtyard, and so what we were talking about before about the right of way, I think that somehow interplays with an understanding that they're going to be moving between those spaces. And so according to that part of the Mishnah, if you've only basically got one resident in one and one resident in the other, I think what the Mishnah is saying is that they don't have to prepare an Eruv to be able to move in between them. Either way, Mazel Tov, gentlemen and ladies,
my question,
on completing
my lease gives me the right of use of the entire property, all the public places. No one can restrict me from using the gardens or the front of the building. I have a right over it. So this seems to be saying that if I've got a right over it, then I don't have to get permission from somebody else to use it.
So far, the only thing that I've been able to glean from these Mishnayos is that I'm not an expert on Eruvin. That's all I've been able to glean from it. But we do what we can.
I didn't ask a specific question, but I do remember discussing it with somebody, and who's not an Eruvin authority. The answer I was given, sort of round, was that if there's a fence right around the building, and I put a food parcel of bread somewhere, then, and I have a right over it, then it looks to me as if it's mine to use. But I hope it is anyway. I shall ask somebody. I should try and find out. I shall ask Rabbi Lieberman if he understands it. If you don't mind me asking somebody else.
Why would I mind? I'd love to know what the outcome is.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, equally, I can look into it for you if you'd like me to. Moving on to the 7th parak. Moving on to parak Shvi, parak Zayin. So, dealing now with courtyards and how they can be connected or be considered connected. If there is an opening, not necessarily like a full doorway, but just like a big window or a big hole in the wall between the two courtyards, so then some very interesting halachas apply. Says the Mishnah Aleph, Chalon shebein shtei chatzeres, if you've got a window, an opening between two courtyards, and what that means is then the wall is arba al arba, you've got four, the space of the window is 4 by 4 tfachim. Yeah, 4 by 4 tfachim, and betoch asara, and there is the opening is coming within 10 tefachim from the ground. Says the Mishnah, it's going to be viewed as two distinct properties, or it could be considered as one distinct two distinct courtyards or one distinct courtyard. They have the choice. So says the Mishnah, Arba al Arba, it's 4 by 4 tefachim, the size of this hole. B'toch asar is within 10 tefachim of the ground. Says the Mishnah, Ma'arvin shnayim v'imratzu ma'arvin echad. If they want, they can just create two Erev Chatzeros, one for that courtyard, one for that courtyard, or if they want, they can combine all together and therefore pass between the two courtyards. Pachos me'arba al arba, if the opening is less than 4x4, or lamala me'asara, or it is higher than 10 tefachim from the ground, which means that it goes higher than the airspace of the domain. Then says the Mishnah, Ma'arvin shnayim me'ein ma'arvin echad. So then the hole is not big enough to be able to pass between the two, and so you are going to have to make two distinct Eruvei Chatzeros. You are not going to be able to join the two together. Says the Mishnah, Kosel, let's scroll down. Kosel shebein shtei Chatzeros gavah asara v'rachav arba. If you have a wall between two courtyards, which is more than 10 tefachim high, and the space on the top of the wall, i.e. the thickness of the wall, is 4 tefachim, so then that wall, the top of that wall, is going to be considered its own domain. So whereas you might, in theory, be able to jump over the wall and lovely, gesundheit, however, because the flat surface of the top of the wall is 4 tefachim, that becomes its own domain. And so you won't be able to create one shared Eruv between the two courtyards. So the Mishnah says, Ma'arvin shnayim, ve'ein ma'arvin echad. You will have to create two Eruvs, and you won't be able to make one Eruv. Hayu barosha peros. What if there is fruit? If they leave food on the top of this wall? So the Mishnah says, Elu olim mikam va'ochlin, ve'elin olim mikam va'ochlin. So actually each one can climb up and take from the top of the wall. They're just not allowed to take it back down into their own courtyards, because you're going to be transferring from one rishus to another. But if they're up there, they would be entitled to enjoy the food that was up there. Says the Mishnah, Nifrat hakosal adese amos. If the wall gets breached to the length of 10 amos, ma'arvin shnayim, ve'ratzu ma'arvin echad mipnei shu kepesach. So because there's now this big breach, then they have a choice. They can either make two Eruvs, or now they could make one Eruv and join everyone together, because the breach in the wall makes it like the opening that we saw in the previous Mishnah, and they could, if they wanted to, merge together. But if the breach was so big and so vast that it was bigger than 10 almost, so then you don't have a choice. It is now considered one big courtyard space, and you can only make one Eruv. You can no longer make two distinct Eruvs because the breach is too big. What about in the other direction? What about if it's not a wall that's separating the two courtyards? What if it's a big ditch that's separating the two courtyards? So separating the two courtyards. So even though you can see from one courtyard to the other, what we're going to see is if the ditch is a certain dimension, it is going to be considered two distinct courtyards. Says the Mishnah, Mishnah Gimel, Charitz, Shebein, Shtei Chatzeros. If you have a ditch which is between two courtyards, Amok, Asara, V'rachav, Arba, the same dimensions but downwards, right? It is 10 tefachim deep, and the surface, the width of the ditch is 4 tefachim across, 4 handbreadths across. It's going to be considered its own domain. So the Mishnah says, Ma'arvin shnayim ve'ein ma'arvin echad. You can make two courtyards, you can't make one. Even though they can literally see from one to the other, they can't combine to make one big courtyard. Says the Mishnah, Afilu male kash or teven. Even if it was filled with kash or teven, straw, or it translates it there as stubble, but hay or straw, basically any animal food. You might have filled this entire ditch with animal food, filled in that gap, but because it could be eaten over Shabbos by the animals, it won't count. It's as if it's not there for all intents and purposes. However, says the Mishnah, Male Afar or Sororos, but if it was filled with earth, or if it was filled with pebbles, which are going to remain there throughout the course of Shabbos, then you've changed the dimensions now of that ditch. And so the Mishnah says, Ma'arvin echad ve'ein ma'arvin shnayim. It now becomes one distinct domain, one distinct courtyard, and now you can't separate into two distinct courtyards. What an interesting and fascinating application of the halucha. What about if you have a bridge between the two properties, between the two courtyards? Says the Mishnah, Nosam alav neser, shehu rachav arba tefachim. If you put a plank of wood down, which is 4 tefachim wide, v'chein shtei gzuzdrau zukanegezu, or you have two balconies which are opposite each other. So now you have a choice, says the Mishnah. If you want, you can view it as two courtyards, and if you want, you can view it as one courtyard. Pachos mekan, if the beam is less than 4 tefachim, it's not big enough to be sturdy. It is not big enough to get over comfortably. And so the Mishnah says, it can only be viewed as two courtyards, and you have to make two Eruvs. You can't now come together and make one Eruv. Continuing with Mishnah Hey, with Mishnah 5. What if you have matbein shebein shtei chatzeros gavoa asara tefachim? What if you have an enormous pile of straw between two courtyards, which is 10 tefachim high? What should you do then? Says the Mishnah, it actually counts as two distinct properties, two distinct courtyards, even though the straw is going to get eaten over the Shabbos, even though the animals are going to eat it, and the hay is going to diminish in size, and it's going to be less than 10 tefachot. Nonetheless, says the Mishnah, but it doesn't stop the animals from being able to eat. They can eat from both sides of the straw pile. If before Shabbos you realize that this pile of hay is now less than 10 tefachim, so then you do have an opportunity to combine together. Not only that, but it's actually viewed as one big courtyard. You can no longer view it as two distinct courtyards. Moving on to Mishnah Vav, we're going to primarily discuss how we actually go about making a shituf mavuot, the alleyway partnership, the Eruv for the alleyway. And what we're going to see is that either everyone can contribute towards it, or one person can do it and acquire it and make the Eruv on everyone's behalf. Says the Mishnah, Ketzad mishtatfin b'mavoy. How do we go about making a shituf mavoy, the partnership for the alleyway? Says the Mishnah, Maniach es achavis v'omer. He puts down the barrel and he says, he puts down the barrel and he says, this is going to be for every resident of the alleyway. And he acquires it. And he can acquire it for everyone. Says the Mishnah, even his son could do this for everybody. Ubita, or his daughter could do this for everybody, as long as they are gedolim, as long as they are adults, halachic adults. Or he could get his Hebrew, his Jewish servants or maidservants to do this. He can get his wife to do this. But he can't get his kids, his young kids, to acquire on everyone's behalf. And he can't use his non-Jewish servants, because their hand is like his hand. And so, because it's not him acquiring for everyone, but it's only them acquiring it, they can only acquire it for him. So they can't acquire it for everybody on his behalf, but they could acquire it just for him. Says the Mishnah, if everyone contributes at the beginning of the week, but by Shabbos they realize that this food is starting to diminish already, then what we're going to see apparently is that he can refill it without everybody's consent, because they have already indicated that they wish to be a part of it. Says the Mishnah, if the food amount gets reduced, it diminishes. Says the Mishnah, Mosef and Mazakeh, he can add to it and confer possession on everyone's behalf. And he doesn't need to tell them, because they've already indicated that they were a part of it. However, if the number of residents increases, if someone moves into the area and now wants to take part in the Eruv, then he can add on to it, and he can confer possession for everybody, acquire possession for everybody, but he has to inform them as well. All right, Mishnah Ches says the Mishnah, Kama hu shioro, how much do we need to be able to make an Erev Chatzeros? Says the Mishnah, God bless you. Says the Mishnah, Bisman Shehem Eruvin, if there are a lot of people living off this courtyard, says the Mishnah, Mazon Shtei Sudos Lekulam, then you have to have enough food sufficient to feed each resident for 2 meals. Bisman Shehem Muatin Kagro Geres Lotzas Shabbos Lekol Echad Ve'echad. And when there are few residents there, then the food need only be of the size of a dried fig for each one. So I have a note here that if there are more than 18 people living in the courtyard, then you need the amount for 2 meals. And if it's less than 18 people, then you need to have only the minimum of the grogeres, of the amount of the dried fig, which is the amount that we have for carrying. If you remember all that time ago when we were talking about how much would you have to be carrying before you are chayev for the malacha of hotza'ah, for the malacha of carrying, we said it was a grogeres. So that is why we have this measurement of a dried fig. That is what has to be in place before Shabbos to be able to make this Erev Chatzeros. Says the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yossi, what are we talking about? Says the Mishnah, B'tchilas Erev. This is when you are first forming the Erev. Why I'm jumping from an Erev. I think the last Mishnah was actually talking about the alleyway. Not so clear in my notes, but I think it was talking about an alleyway, because over here what I've got in my notes is that it's applying to the alleyway. So when does this apply? This applies to when you're first making the Erev for the Shituf Mavuas. Aval b'shiare Erev kol shehu. But when it comes to the remnants of the Erev, I mean, like when you need to add on to it going forward, if the amount diminishes and you have to add more on, then the Mishnah says kol shehu, it's enough to add even the smallest quantity of food to be able to top it up. And the only purpose for setting up the Erev for the courtyards is that the concept of carrying and the concept of Eruvin, it doesn't get forgotten amongst the children, amongst essentially by the community. The ability to understand what's at risk and what's at play, we have to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten. Where were we seeing? Was it last week that we were seeing that you have to purposely leave some parts of the area without an Erev in order to also ensure that the laws are not forgotten. Okay. Continuing with Mishnah Yud, says the Mishnah. We actually saw this information, these halachas, previously, so this might sound familiar. B'kol ma'arvin and mishtatfin, you are allowed to use anything to create your Erevs. You're allowed to use anything to create your Erevs. It's a quote from chapter 3 already, but we're seeing it in a different light over here. So you're allowed to use anything for your Erevs or for your shittufs, for your partnerships. Rabbi Eliezer says you can't use water and you can't use salt. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehoshua says, Kikahu Erev, a loaf of bread is the Erev. Afilu ma'afe sa'a v'hi prusa, even if you bake 1 sa'ah's worth of bread, v'hi prusa, but it's a broken loaf, ein ma'arvin ba, then you may not use it for an Erev. Kikar ba'isa v'ushale, but if you have a loaf of bread which is only the size of an isar, which is small, who's shalem, but it is a whole loaf of bread nonetheless, then ma'arvin bo, you would be allowed to use it for an eruv. So what's interesting there is that the loaf of bread must be complete, and it won't matter necessarily what the size is, but it has to be complete. And even if it's very big, but it's all broken up, then you're not going to be able to use it for the eruv. Mishnah Yud Aleph, the last Mishnah of our parak tonight, the 11th Mishnah over here. Says the Mishnah, no saying Adam ma'a lachen vani v'lanachtom kadei sheyizken eruv divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that a person may give some money to a shopkeeper or to a baker in order that he should take responsibility for acquiring his share in the eruv. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that is going to be okay. Chachamim say, lo zachu lo ma'osav. They say that his money is not going to work, because when it comes to movable items, we have a ruling that we cannot acquire these things with or solely with money. There has to be some physical action that takes place as well. So if he's just giving money without doing the full shebang of lifting items or having the shopkeeper lift items on his behalf, then it's not going to work. However, they agree that in the case of all other people, his money may acquire an eruv for him, because they're only going to be doing it with his acquiescence, with his approval. Rabbi Yehuda says, what are we referring to? But we are referring to the eruv tchumin that we talked about all that time ago. But when it comes to the eruv for a courtyard, the Mishnah says, so then the eruv can be acquired with his consent or without his consent. Because we have a rule in halacha, in the Talmud, we have a rule that agency for someone's benefit is going to work, even if he doesn't know about it, but not liability, not something detrimental. You can't act in a way that is detrimental for another person without their consent. Nonetheless, you can do something that confers a benefit on them without their consent. Mazel tov on finishing chapter 7, Perek Zayin. And that is all we have got time for, ladies and gentlemen. So we are going to stop the recording over here. And if you want to join us for the after party, we look forward to seeing you. But in the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful evening or day, whenever you're listening.